What up, everybody? Welcome to the State of Wild, episode 9, and now regular podcast, YouTube video, web series thing. I'm joined by my good friend and co-host CorbettGames. Corbett, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, what's up, Meowth? I'm doing very well. A little sleepy, but apart from that, good to go.
Dude, the time zones. For anybody that doesn't know, Corbett's in Australia, and I'm on the east coast of the US. So I think there's like actually a 12-hour difference between us or something like that. So it's we record this at very weird times. So I hope you guys understand that. If either one of us is speaking nonsense, that'll be our excuse, you know? But the rest of you guys know the drill by now. We're going to do 3 things during this episode. First of all, we're going to be talking about the state of the wild meta. So obviously what's dominating, how to beat it, and any decks that might be flying underneath the radar. Second off, we're going to be talking about any wild news, controversial topics, or maybe the lack thereof. And last but not least, we'll be talking about our decks of the week. So a powerful meta deck, one that's being a little bit underestimated, or a fun off-meta choice that we've been enjoying. And so before we get started, just a reminder to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy content like this. It's free and it supports us a lot. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So talking about the state of the wild meta. So we recorded this episode last week talking about cards that we kind of wanted to see nerfed potentially. And then immediately the day after, they nerfed 2 of the cards, right? So you guys are welcome, all right, first of all. So let's talk a little bit about these nerfs to Kael'thas and Elucia. So those of you guys that haven't seen already, Kael'thas now makes every 3rd spell cost 1 from 0, and Elucia has gone from 2 mana to 3. So obviously they've impacted Druid and they've impacted Reno Priest. So that Miracle OTK Druid is already outdated, but it's still being run in a ton of other Druid decks. And then obviously Elucia getting nerfed. I think the only deck that really ran it was Reno Priest competitively. And so I want to get your opinion as kind of like the resident high legend expert here. How have they impacted Druid and Reno Priest? Like, obviously the power level is a little bit lower, but have they really disrupted where they lie in the metagame?
I think that Mage Druid was already like seeing very limited play. And it definitely makes the deck like a lot worse against aggro. I haven't really like played the deck personally very much, and I haven't really seen a ton of it. So a lot of this is kind of this in theory, but yeah, previously like scamming out UIs with Kael was one of your really like the only ways you won against aggro. And so I think Mage Druid just took a really, really significant hit here. As for Priest, like, Elucia was probably your second best turn 2 play, like right behind Zeph into aggro matchups. So, it definitely feels a lot worse, against aggro because often like, there's a big difference between turn 2 and turn 3 in how often your opponent can like use the coin. Now that they don't have to feel like they have to immediately use it on their first turn before you can like cheat it. And so yeah, that kind of really changed. But I mean, you still run it. Still like a really, really crucial card for like disrupting combo and super important for Reno Priest and the meta as a whole. But yeah, that's been about it. I don't think it's actually impacted things a ton in terms of like the grand scope, even if the cards themselves are like significant in what's happened.
Yeah, I 100% agree with the Elucia note when it comes to Reno Priest. I will say a lot of the Druid lists that we were seeing in the first couple weeks of the expansion were actually like running 0 copies of Poison Seeds, and they were sometimes going down to like 1 copy of Spreading Plague. I wonder if like this nerf to Kael'thas, like you at least now have to be running Double Plague, right? Like 100%.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think like you probably already should have been doing that, but yes, it definitely like forces your hand.
Yeah, I'm interested in like how Druid's going to shake up, because I feel like the meta right now, we were talking about this last week, or 2 weeks ago, where Mali Druid feels like one of the stronger matchups into Reno Priest, like at the time. And it's kind of interesting that it has completely dropped off the face of the earth, and we'll talk maybe a little bit about why. I think Darkglare Warlock and Kingsman have a big part in that, but I'd be interested to see, like, in the grand scheme of things, I don't actually think the Kael'thas nerf is that relevant. I think the big thing with the Kael'thas nerf is like you no longer get the turn 5 blowout double UI turns that are just like they feel really shitty to play against, right? You no longer get that. I think in general the Druid like power level remains relatively stable because Druid eventually came down to like drawing plague against aggro almost anyways. Whereas I think Elucia does hurt Reno Priest, but I still think that Elucia is like an insanely strong card in that deck, and I don't think like it hurts the aggro matchups that much because it's priest, right? So
Yeah.
I would agree that I don't think either of them have like drastically been affected by these nerfs.
Yeah, I think Jade Druid might even be more affected than Mali in some ways, but
yeah.
I mean, I do think the Kale is a bigger deal for Druid in the like larger scope, I suppose.
Than Lucia.
But yeah, than Lucia. But yeah, I mean, it was like deja vu, right? It was so weird. We were talking about the nerves, and then the next day it was like, so Meowth, what else do you want to talk about? What else are we getting nerfed tomorrow?
Yeah, let's. So we're gonna nerf literally everything in the format until we're playing Yetis on 4 again. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
All right. So we talked a little bit about this before. Let's talk about Darkglare Warlock, right? We talked about this last week about this new deck that had burst onto the scene. And I think in the week that's passed, I have seen a lot of conversation about Darkglare Warlock, to put it lightly. A lot of complaining about Darkglare Warlock, a lot of crying for nerfs already. And so now that we've had a week for the meta to sort of shift and adapt to Darkglare Warlock, are you still sold on this deck being like the best deck in the format, or do you think it's the best deck in the format? Like, where do you think it lies in the grand scope of the metagame? Because I feel like I've seen so much Painzu, or whatever you want to call it, and I have seen some really, really interesting attempts from at least the NA WoW ladder to adapt to it. So I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so it's been like what 10 days now since the Chinese meta report that came out that I can't pronounce. When that was released 10 days ago, that's really when it popped up on NA and EU. So that's a week really since like we last recorded. So yeah, like it's everywhere, right? Like Darkglare Warlock is everywhere. It's really, really strong. I went through my matchups. I didn't go through each replay personally, but I saw that about 60 to 65% of my opponents are either Darkglare Warlock or Reno Priest of like the past 200 games.
That's insane. That's a little bit insane. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a very, very high number. So yeah, you say it like burst onto the scene. It's more like it just exploded and like ripped it apart.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's right up there with Reno Priest as the two defining decks of the format. They're the most important decks, they're the warping decks, they're the most popular decks, they're the most powerful decks. Darkglare Warlock, it's very tough. Like, you're talking about counters and viable counters and experimenting with weird stuff. And I feel like I'm part of that, where I've tried some really janky things like Nerubian Weblord, Christology Paladin to try and like tutor out the Weblord and really like slow them down. But then like once I got Spirit Bombed, I was like, oh, okay, so they can counter that if they actually want to. Like if I ever plan on doing this, it's like, oh, they could just like 1 mana answer and I actually lose tempo. So it's kind of nutty. Yeah, as for like any viable counters and stuff, I'm really struggling to find some.
Well, so you mentioned like Darkglare Warlock or Painzu. Let's call it Darkglare Warlock, okay? Darkglare Warlock and Priest, 65-70% of the metagame. Is that because you think Priest is the best matchup into Darkglare, or is it just like the case of two extremely strong decks that are like 50-50 into each other, and then they beat everything else in the metagame?
Yeah, the latter. I think they're both two ridiculously strong decks that go relatively even into each other. It's not like I don't think Reno Priest is the direct counter anymore. I think Darkglare players have generally improved in how they're playing the matchup, and have also generally like pushed towards builds that try and beat Priest, right? Makes sense if Priest is like 25-30% of the meta. And so yeah, I just think like together they make this really this dominating combo that make it very, very hard to target one over the other, because the types of deck that should beat Darkglare in theory, they get destroyed by Priest.
Yeah,
and
that's been my experience. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very tough to target both at the same time. And there is some decks that do okay, right? Like there's some decks that you might say maybe it's slightly favorable into Darkglare Warlock, but there's no like direct counter that seems like it's that viable in the meta as a whole, at least that I can see right now.
Yeah, I think my experience has been you find a deck and it's like got a decent matchup into Darkglare, but then you get absolutely demolished by the 30% of Priest on ladder, or you find the matchup that's like really good into Priest and you get demolished by the 30% of Darkglare on ladder, right? So I would agree with that. Let's break this down a little bit. So let's talk about Darkglare itself. So I think the deck itself actually has an extremely high skill cap compared to like the perception of the deck. And I feel like that's always the case where people perceive it to be this brain dead Darkglare on 3 combo style of deck, whereas having played it myself, I played like 40 or 50 games in the span of 2 days, and the amount of nuance, like, I don't want to say strategy, but like pre-planning and then correct ordering to optimize mana and prioritization of like what you're playing on what turn and what order is super nuanced and super important depending on the matchup. So
and it's on a massive time
yeah, you only have 70
right?
seconds
like,
to figure all this out and play all the cards and draw all your cards and use all your mana. 100% agree. And so for those of the listeners that are just recently picking up the deck and trying to learn it and play it and climb to legend or climb legend with this brand new powerful deck, do you have some like general tips and tricks for these players? Because I know you've been playing a lot of it, and I've only been playing it for a few days, so I can say a few things, but I know you've played it like maybe 3 times as much as I have. I would just say that like your certain matchups you want Lotheb right before you commit giants, or some matchups you just care about tempo. Broomstick is like super important in certain matchups compared to others. And without getting like too deep into the weeds on like in this specific matchup with this specific hand, do you kind of just have some tips for all of those listening?
So in terms of like the higher level players, I'm sure they already kind of know what they're doing. Like a lot of the time in terms of like going in with Lothab and kind of like waiting again in the priest matchup, and then figuring out like you know, you need to make sure you go in before the Anduin if you're like even without the Lothab and stuff like that. So like I think like the high level players understand, but like in terms of like people who might not be as experienced who are just like picking it up, there's a few like glaring things that stand out when I looked at some HS replay data, which was interesting. So like Crystallizer, for example, it sees a lot of play on turn 1, which is really not what you want to be doing with Crystallizer. Crystallizer on 1 will immediately like stop your Flesh Giant from getting reduced and kind of like slow down everything else. So if you're playing Crystallizer, make sure you try and like hold it for the combo turn unless you're playing against aggro and you just need to tempo it. But yeah, it was really surprising the amount of play when I looked at the turn counter. What else? You identified like Broom. If you have Broom in like the mirror, don't feel like you immediately have to vomit out your stats as fast as you can. You can wait a turn, but if you have to like Darkglare and Raise Dead versus like Sense Demons, you might want to Sense Demons instead. If you have the Broom, because it's all about like the counter swing.
Yeah, I
it doesn't
feel
really
like
matter like who vomits stats first.
Yeah, exactly.
If you have the Broomstick.
I was about to say like in the mirror, I feel like it's more whoever pops off second is in a favorable position, especially if they have the Broom, right? Because
because of all those favorable trades they can make.
And then like you don't as a Darkglare Warlock, you don't really have a ton of ways to swing the board back in your favor, right? If you get Broomsticked in the mirror, unless you also have 4 giants for some reason and a Broomstick, like you're not really coming back from that position. So I agree. I think the mirror is a super difficult matchup to play. Like that, the mirror hurts my brain a little bit to play. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, and there's also the last thing, which is like, hey, just don't attack the face. You know, like I know it's very tempting sometimes, and just trying to figure out when you should be attacking face or don't attack face. A lot of times, just don't attack the face, right? Like you don't want to get those Molten Giants cheaper. If you're playing as Priest or something, this isn't playing as Darklock. But in the mirror, don't attack the face. But yeah, if you're playing Priest, just like renew your opponent. Like
Hero Power Pass on turn 2. Like
Hero Power Pass, yeah, legit. Yeah. Just like really deny and slow down those Molten Giant turns if you can. And that same goes for the mirror in terms of like, do I attack with my Librarian on turn 2? It's like, probably not.
Yeah. All right. So if you guys are interested in learning how to play this deck, I highly recommend you guys check out Corbett's stream. At least drop a follow so that you guys can watch his VOD. He does play a ton of the deck and plays it very well. And he's not going to sell out, so I'm going to do it for him. But let's talk about some counters, because I know a lot of people hate the deck, and I know you are kind of adamant that there are no counters, right? But I've had a little bit of success with something like Reno Priest, right? Wave of Apathy has been really good, especially because you save it for their Lotheb lockout turn, and then you can actually Wave of Apathy into a Mass Hysteria or a Psychic Scream or an Anduin. So I've had the most success against Darkglare Warlock running Reno Priest. Do you really feel like that's not a counter to Darkglare Warlock?
I think that It's probably slightly favored, but I think that I've been seeing a lot of warlocks taking in the cult.
Oh, the neophyte. Yeah.
Yeah, the neophyte. Yeah, the 2 mana 3/2 spells cost 1 more. So people are using that in the like flex spot, and I think that definitely like improves the matchup. I personally played Polka as a way to try and put your Lothab towards the top of the deck
in the Darkglare Warlock. Okay.
Yeah, in Darkglare Warlock. Cool. Yeah, so I was playing that as a bit of an experiment, and that kind of improved things a little bit as well. So I think that like Darkglare into Reno Priest is probably a matchup that gets better for the Warlock with more play experience and stuff. Yeah. But I think it does fine. Like I think Reno Priest is a fine counter. Like I don't like it's not crying every time you see a Darkglare Warlock by any means. It might even win more than it loses, but it's not like a firm, you know, like a favorable. Like it's not really something I think that'll actually push out Darkglare for sure in the format.
I will say I think the worst part about Darkglare being meta is that it's brought out all the Dead Man's Hand warriors on ladder and odd warriors, and like I think if you have to I think if you have to claim a counter like odd warrior, maybe if you're completely building the odd warrior to be anti Darkglare Warlock with risky skippers and bear-offs and blades, like all that kind of crap, then maybe that's as close as you get to a counter, but then you're like losing to everything else on ladder, so it doesn't really feel like
I think
like the Exodia Mage snip like conversation.
Yeah, I think Odd Demon Hunter is like another one where like Odd Demon Hunter is very aggressive, can put a lot of damage on that makes it difficult for the Warlock to use their cards, and they also have mana burn, which can just be like GG if you play it on like prior to the Darkglare. But again, like Demon Hunter, like it sucks. Like it doesn't matter. Like it's not good into Reno Priest and stuff.
Yeah, I like the other potential counters that I had written down here in our notes were actually stuff like Secret Mage and Kingsbane Rogue, stuff that's super aggressive and can kill the Darkglare Warlocks, right? But then you run into this problem we talked about earlier where you're losing to Reno Priest, right? So like if you really hate Darkglare that much, there are options out there. But if you're trying to beat both Darkglare and Reno Priest, you're gonna run into a little bit of issues. But yeah, I want to wrap up this meta section with one last conversation. So I tweeted out a couple days ago just because it was like a brand new deck, and I was like, let the meta play out for a little bit. It's okay that we have a strong deck. Just and I tweeted out, I was like, you guys are complaining about Darkglare Warlock, but like Darkglare Warlock is not the most powerful deck in the metagame, right? So if you're complaining about this, you should also be complaining about that. And so I got a response, and shout outs to Hazer. If you guys don't know Hazer, he's a very high legend player. And I wanted to bring up a response of his. And this is not to knock the response, but this is just to kind of have a conversation. He replied, there's a fine line between the best deck in the game and an unhealthy deck for the game. Darkglare, if not the best deck, is certainly unhealthy. And so then I replied, well, if the question then becomes, where are you drawing this line at unhealthy, right? Because if you're saying Darkglare is unhealthy, well, I also think like Hemet on 6, Mechithing combo on 7 is unhealthy. I think Quest Mage was unhealthy. I think Reno Priest, super unhealthy, right? And so while I agree that Darkglare is super strong, right? If you touch it, then there's now precedent for anything that anybody deems unhealthy. And so I kind of want to just open up this conversation, kind of freeform conversation for a couple minutes with like, how do you define unhealthy? Is unhealthy like a fine line for drawing the line that this needs to be nerfed? Or is it just like sentiment, right? Like people don't hate losing to Reno Priest because it kind of feels fair, right? It happens turn 7, turn 8, turn 9, whereas losing against Darkglare is losing turn 4, turn 5, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So like in general, I think like when talking about what's healthy, it's all about sentiment. Yeah. And win rate and stuff like that and popularity, that can all like factor into sentiment, right? Like if you're seeing a deck, 40% of the time, you're probably not going to feel very good about it. But I think it's always about like what the player experience is and how they're feeling and whether they're having fun and whether the game feels like it's good or not and whether the play base as a whole feels like that. And so it's really a personal decision or a personal feeling about whether something is healthy or unhealthy, whether something breaks or feels wrong in the game in a way that kind of goes against what your expectations are for what should be kind of allowed. So I think like the biggest thing is that you just want to make sure everything feels fine relative to everything else. Like if everyone else is doing broken stuff, then then we can up the power level, right? It's not like we're going to go put like UI back in classic Hearthstone. Then of course, if you did that, it would make it look insane beyond everything else that they had available. But now, like, if everyone else is doing kind of stuff that is kind of nutty, then it feels like you can counter it, you can do your own nutty thing. And so it really just becomes like, is there an aberration? Is there something strange, or is there something that's doesn't belong with what we can currently do? And so for many people, something like Darkglare Warlock, which can vomit out like multiple 8/8s very, very consistently on turn 3 and turn 4, and then lock people out with Load Lab. For a lot of people, that feels like it's something that a lot of decks can't do. It's at a power level that's way too high. It's a play experience that is a little too toxic for them, in whatever way they define that.
Yeah.
And I think that's like perfectly fine. I think that's like a perfectly fine way to think about the game. And if that's your opinion on Darkglare, feel free. And I'm not going to tell you to feel one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think I agree. I think the big reason that people are kind of so up in arms about Darkglare, where they weren't so up in arms about something like turn 7 Mechithune combo every game, or like pull Kelt into Rosin to Anduin into spawn kill on turn 8 or turn 9, is that it happens like you get killed on turn 4, turn 5, whereas opposed to you're getting killed on turn 6, turn 7. Even though the consistency and the power level, and I wouldn't spout any facts about win rates because I don't know those, but like I feel like they're all relatively the same. It's just like people feel bad because they're losing on turn 4, turn 5, rather than losing on turn 6, turn 7. And I don't know. I honestly don't know if that's a fine way to describe unhealthy. And I know, like you're saying, it's per person, but I think this argument of, oh, it's an unhealthy deck for the format. Well, like every powerful deck's unhealthy for the format, right? Because whatever the best decks in the format are, people are going to hate losing to because they're going to be popular, they're going to be strong. So every strong deck is unhealthy, And so it's just a really weird conversation. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm in the boat of like Darkglare Warlock is pretty damn strong. I'm definitely 100% on board with it being the second best or the best deck in the format. Okay, but just because you're getting killed on turn 4, turn 5, rather than turn 6, turn 7, doesn't really feel like, oh, this deck is super unhealthy and it needs to be nerfed immediately, right? At least, especially in the case of Darkglare Warlock, where it's a brand new deck for 2 weeks, right? Where the meta hasn't completely been able to adjust. And so I don't know if that's a useful discussion to have. And I mean, I guess I will now pose the question of like, if people are going to complain about a deck, what's the most constructive way for them to do it other than saying this deck is unhealthy and it feels bad? Because yes, feeling should be taken into account, right? How you feel when you're playing against the deck or when you are playing the deck. But my experience is going to be different than your experience, which is going to be different than the random person on ladder's experience, which is going to be different than somebody at bronze 10 in wild, right? And it's really hard to quantify feeling. And so if you're going to make this argument that Darkglare Warlock needs to be nerfed, how should you go about it, if that makes sense?
I think it's just about identifying why you feel a certain way, right? Like, why do I feel like this is broken? And then sort of being able to convey that, like, very clearly. Rather than just, like, shouting out the word, this is broken, Blizzard, fix it. It's just, like, talk about why the early game power swing, if that's the issue. Like, hey, is this the early game power swing? Should I try and talk about that? Because I think just, like, shouting from the rooftop generally isn't a great way to do it, especially for wild, where a lot of people have very distinct ideas about whether wild should be touched at all, like whether wild should be allowed to roam free and just kind of be able to do whatever you want and never ever have a balance change directly wild related. And so like even just discussing like what people I think people get into these nerf discussions and healthy meta discussions without even sort of being on the same page of what they're talking about. And so I think just like being clear about defining like what the issue is and how you feel about wild as a whole is really important when talking about this stuff. But yeah, people should be able to complain. People should complain if they don't like something. I think that's great. Just be constructive about it.
Just again, nothing against Hazer. I thought it was a good launch point for a discussion, and I hope it was a good discussion. But yeah, so I think we're going to go ahead and move on to part 2. In regards to wild news, we kind of already touched on this, right? We had nerfs like the day after we recorded our last podcast. And so we've talked a little bit about Kael'thas and Lucian. I don't really feel like there's much more to talk about. And so the only other little piece of news is that they have now removed the ability to pull Nozdormu off of Ysera portals. And so this kind of prompted something that's been talked about a lot with Nozdormu should not really be in the game to begin with because of the limitations and everything like that. And I know the person I'm about to quote is going to love the fact that I'm quoting him here. But Lion in my Discord was talking about yesterday. Because Nas requires these really rapid actions, he like single-handedly reduces the accessibility of the game for a lot of people, right? And that's like the whole reason that Hearthstone has become successful, right? And so the fact that people like Ike can pick it up in the hospital, or No Hands Gamer can pick it up despite his physical limitations and be one of the best players in the world, that's a good thing, right? And Nozdormu and cards like that should not be a thing, right? I just wanted to shout out Lion because the way that he articulated this was very, very well. But yeah, big piece of news. I guess the second big piece of news. Nozdormu can't be pulled off your Sarah portal, so you can't rely on that anymore if you are trying to abuse it, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely think Noz should be deleted for a lot of these reasons that Lion has been talking about. If I was watching GM and I saw No Hands get scammed out of a game because he couldn't interact with a Nozdormu, I would be super, super pissed. I think this card should have been deleted and kind of taken away for a long time. Just because of a lot of talking about the accessibility, and this doesn't feel like it's something that should be in Hearthstone. So I would co-sign that for sure.
Yeah, I hope it's at least something they're looking at when it comes to like this basic and classic set revamp. And they're looking at changing that card rather than just Hall of Fame it and move it to Wild sort of mindset. Because I don't even think in Wild that it's a very fun card or useful card at all. Right. All right, but yeah, let's go ahead and move on to part 3. All right, so here's where we talk about our decks of the week. So a top meta deck, an under the radar deck that we think sneaky good, or an off meta deck that we've really been enjoying messing around with for all of you guys that aren't into like the super tryhard legend thing or just looking for a short break at the ranked floor. So for our meta deck of the week, we have Elite, who hit rank 1 legend NA with his take on Reno Priest. I mean, let's just kind of talk about it a little bit. He says, perfect 30 card Raza Priest, Sphere is bad. Do you want to comment a little bit on the uniqueness of his list compared to some of the other Reno Priest lists that you've been seeing?
Yeah, so the main points I think on his list is the low thab, dirty rat, lack of sphere, no wave of apathy, which is interesting. But yeah, apart from that, it's very stock, I think, for the remaining slots. Seems pretty straightforward in terms of the build and stuff. With Sphere, it's an interesting omission because a lot of people have still been playing it, and I've seen a lot of people like kind of talking about the statistical reasons not to play it. And I don't know if Sphere's that bad, but I've been looking a lot at the HS replay info, and I think it's like borderline probably cuttable at this point. I think it's like a card that it's hard to evaluate just from playing it, and I think that getting some more data on that has been really big.
Yeah, I also think that in terms of Sphere, it's kind of hard because a lot of people might not be utilizing it correctly.
Using it just yet. Yeah.
And so like the little stats that we do have on the card might not be completely representative of the potential of the card, right? So I think it's going to take a while before we can like eventually say Sphere good, Sphere bad. I know I personally am a fan of Sphere in a lot of decks. There's 3 things that kind of stood out to me from Elite's Raza Priest list. First of all, although he's running Polkelt, he's also running Mass Dispel and Shadowward Ruin. Shadowward Ruin I can kind of get behind because of the giants when it comes to Darkglare Warlock. Sorry, it kind of escaped my mind for a little bit. But the Mass Dispel also feels a little bit weird with what they're targeting. And for me, clogging up the 4-drop slot feels really bad, right? Because after you play Polkelt, you go Raza, you go Spawn, or Raza then Anduin, and then want to play Spawn as soon as possible, right? And when you're running a bunch of these 4-drops, the consistency of that gets a little bit muddled. But obviously it's been working for them. I guess it's just the cycle potential, but I feel like there's other potential cards out there that could serve the same purpose. And then the big thing I want to touch on, if you guys are listening, there's no frickin' sticky fingers in this deck. You don't need it. Run the ooze instead. Sticky finger bad.
Yeah, I agree this firstly quickly on the Master Spell. I don't think that makes very much sense in the current meta, personally, or in the list in general. So with Sticky Fingers, yeah, a lot of people have been playing that, and it's been very frustrating for me as a Kingsbane player. But hopefully people push back to Glut Ooze. I've been seeing a lot less Kingsbane in general, so I think that people are going to probably gravitate to the Glut, which is better in like non-weapon related matchups and stuff.
I mean, I will say, like, I haven't even been playing Kingsbane, and I'm still getting super pissed off at Sticky Finger because I play Sphere, and I keep getting my Sphere stolen by these decks that run Sticky Finger for no goddamn reason, and it's so annoying. Punished even when I'm not playing Kingsbane. But yeah, so ultimately, if you guys want to play Reno Priest, I think this is a very, very strong shell. Shoutouts to Elite for hitting rank 1 legend on this with this deck. All right, so next up for one of our off-meta decks, I want to talk about a deck that I've been playing that's had a surprisingly high amount of success against all the Reno Priest on ladder. So I've been playing kind of a revamped Luna's Pocket Galaxy Reno Mage. I've kind of completely ditched the dragons just because with the Alexstrasza nerf and the Dragoncaster nerf, it just really doesn't feel worth it at all to run. And I think the big differences in this list is the synergy with Tortolan Pilgrim and Potion of Illusion. And so it's been kind of talked about a lot when it comes to Turtle Mage, right? It's kind of infinite loop style deck, but I've actually just been having a lot of success running like one of Tortolan Pilgrim that you kind of want to run anyways because you run Pocket Galaxy. Yeah. And with the addition of Potion of Illusion to do like these mini Turtle Mage loops, and I've been absolutely demolishing Reno Priest list and Quest Mage list just by looping Lothebs, right? So now that you have Brand Lotheb, you have Zola to copy your Lothebs, you have Potion of Illusion to now copy your Lothebs, you have Barista to copy your Lothebs. It's been kind of degenerate, honestly, and it's been really, really good against Priest. I think the iffy cards on this list, I'm running a Potion of Polymorph and Inkmaster Solia just in a small attempt to help increase my matchups into Darkglare, which have like been the worst matchups for this deck. The ability to potentially cheat out a Potion of Polymorph and cheese the Darkglare, for example, or screw up the Raised Dead potentially. And then the ability to like Solia out a Frost Nova if they try to Lotheb block you, or Solia out a 10-mana Polypot. And so it's just a couple of experiments that I've been having, but I've been performing really, really well. I've had about a 70% win rate in Legend, around rank 400, so not like super high Legend, but I climbed from like rank 1,000 with it, so it's been pretty good. And there's a ton of refinement to be had. I think the Conjurer's Calling and Jandis are probably the worst cards in the deck, but they're a lot of fun to play with, new cards. And since you're going super anti-aggro, the Conjurer's Calling allows you to cheese some pressure against stuff like Dead Man's Hand Warrior or Odd Warrior, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, LPG Mage was like my favorite deck to play in, I think it was the June season. So I had a lot of fun with it, and I'm kind of thinking about it because yeah, it was a great counter to Priest at the time, and I'm sure it's still a really solid counter now, even without the dragons. So I'm kind of looking at this and I'm like, I need to try this. I do fear like the hell out of Darkglare. That looks a little spooky, but yeah, this looks pretty sick.
Yeah, I basically insta-lost against everything. I will say I didn't draw any of my like tech cards against Darkglare Warlock, so it's a little bit hard to say. But I farmed Reno Priest. I was like 8-1, 9-1 against Reno Priest. The matchups get a little bit weird against Reno Priest if they like Elucia.
Yeah.
And then like the Turtle Mage loops can get a little bit confusing. I've screwed up my loops a lot because I don't pay attention to hand size, but that's just me being bad. But I think there's like 4 or 5 like flex spots in this list that I'm still messing around with. But I do think that Pocket Galaxy Mage does still have a place in the metagame potentially, if you can dodge Pain Zoo or Darkglare, whatever. But I mean, maybe there's some like sweet tech cards out there that I'm like, I don't know about that might help that matchup, but I don't know. I spent a while thinking about them. I couldn't find any. But yeah, I mean, LPG Mage back on the menu. This is not a free-to-play friendly list, so if you're free to play, look away. Don't look at this, okay? And last but not least, do you want to take away with our second off-meta deck?
Yeah, so I was again like looking at Haters Replay, like I do obsessively, and I found like this odd Shaman, which is kind of insane. It was performing pretty well, not like the greatest deck in the entire world with the Arena Priest and Darkglares on the website, but odd Shaman looked really solid, which was surprising. I hunted it down. I found it was from Anura, and a lot of people had been apparently playing it. I saw a whole bunch of tweets and stuff. So yeah, odd Shaman got a lot of kind of like actually significant support from the recent expansion with a card like Tour Guide, which is a really, really big deal, just to try and get that instant Totem on 1 to get obviously great in all the odd Baku decks. But it picked up a whole bunch of other stuff. And so, yeah, I saw this list and I was like, damn, it's actually performing well. In theory, it might be able to have an okay time in the Darkglare, kind of, because of all the bursts you're running and stuff.
Yeah, for me, it feels like just like an aggro shaman, but like maybe better, like right?
Yeah, it's just like kind of a different take on aggro shaman, I think. I think like something that I personally would try if I was going to pick this up would be Raz, the 5 mana 3/6 like Dreadlord that gains damage for every spell totem. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Maybe over the Instructor Fireheart. I feel like the Fireheart's a little bit wonky, but
yeah, I would probably try that over the Fireheart, or I might cut the Marsh Spawns for maybe the Raz and the Lothab or something like that. But yeah, this list, like I haven't had the chance to try it myself, but it looks pretty fun. Seems competitive at least. So yeah, give it a go, guys.
I guess we don't really have a place to judge this deck building because Anura hit top 100 legend on NA and EU with this deck, and we haven't played it, right? So first of all, play their list. It's probably better than the suggestions we're making, or they at least have a reason for why they're not running him. But I've played a little bit of Odd Shaman. My list was not anything like this list, which might be the reason why I didn't do so hot. But yeah, the list looks really, really sick. I'm excited to try it. I'm probably going to jam it my next stream, actually. It looks really, really fun.
Yeah, definitely give it a go. I had to build and I just like missed it last stream, so I might get back to it as well.
Yeah, so shout outs to Anura for this deck list. It's pretty sick. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's it for us today. We're reaching that time of the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. We are doing these episodes every week, so new news, new discussions, new decks every episode. So if you guys enjoy that kind of content, make sure you guys hit that subscription button so you guys know when the new episodes go live. And if you are a person that's on the go in the real world doing real life things, like that's kind of scary. I can't imagine that. But our podcast is now officially on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, which is awesome. We are officially podcasters, dude.
Oh my god, dude, we made it.
I know.
I need to call my mom and stuff.
We're famous.
Amazing.
But yeah, if you guys are on the move and want to check out our latest episodes, they will be up there. Just search The State of Wild or either of our names and it should pop up. Corbett, thank you again for joining me today, man. Let the people know where they can find you.
Guys, you can always find me at CorbettGames on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, all that stuff. This is CorbettGames. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's another really fun time.
Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this content. It's a lot of fun to make. I enjoy hanging out with Corbett, and I hope you guys enjoyed as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you guys next time. Later.
Bye, guys.